So I have another Yoga Basics video for you today, and this one is going to be all about pigeon pose. I decided just to stick with that one pose for today instead of a category of poses because there are all sorts of different ways that we can approach pigeon, lots of different variations and options to mess around with and experiment with. So that being said, let's just kind of talk about what we're doing in the traditional placement that we see in so many different yoga classes. So I'll do my right leg as my pigeon leg first. So in pigeon, we are abducting the leg, right, from the hip joint. So that means moving away from the midline. So that means my right leg is going to go over to the right. And we're also externally rotating that leg, so kind of rolling the thigh open. I see a lot of people when they're approaching this, more traditional placement, bring their knee a little bit too much in the center of the mat, right? Which is not necessarily problematic or incorrect or potentially injurious or any of those things. However, if you are attempting to sort of recreate this traditional posture, you may find that if your knee is a little bit too much in the middle, you're going to have a hard time keeping your hips balanced and square from side to side, which again is more traditional in that pigeon position. Back leg is just kind of extending back straight out from the hip. And this is typically where I will kind of put my pigeon position on this side. You might see some upright variations, which entail a little bit more back bending. Or a lot of people prefer a folded variation. Sometimes in this folded variation, you might check in with what's going on with your spine, just to kind of see if that makes a difference for you and how things feel. I like to think of keeping a little bit more of a neutral position. If I go all the way down, sometimes I get a little bit rounded. Sometimes I will use a block to rest on to help me with that. You might also use a block to prop up that pigeon hip, and that can take a little bit of the intensity out of the stretch. I have seen people prop up with blocks or bolsters or blankets, etc., underneath more their torso, under the belly, under the chest, just depending. You could also put a block up underneath that back leg, right? If that is giving you any sort of discomfort, right? Experiment with that. Then back knee discomfort, put a blanket under there. So in this more traditional pigeon alignment here, one of the things that I also encourage people to think about is what degree of bend do we have that front leg in? So a lot of people think, or I've heard this before, that your pigeon shin needs to be parallel to the top of the mat. So if I'm going to achieve that, I'm going to sort of come out of my hips square position, right? Get that leg forward. And then for me, because my hip does not necessarily want to do that super easily, it's really hard for me to maintain a squared up position. So if you felt like you wanted to have your shin more parallel to the top of the mat, you could prop that hip up to kind of help alleviate that, if that feels more difficult for you at that angle, which it does for me. Or if you like how that more parallel shin feels, but again, like your hip won't stay square, let it plop over, right? Not the end of the world there. In fact, this is somewhat related to a variation that I will sometimes offer or just, kind of throw in as an extra position to pigeon, right? So right now I've got a parallel pigeon leg. If you bring your back leg in here and sort of mimic that angle as well, this is called a 90-90 position. And especially if you kind of fold forward toward that front leg, it still feels more pigeon-like. And of course the back leg is not doing the same thing, but in all honesty, the back leg is not really doing a whole lot in that more traditional pigeon anyway. So if you felt like the traditional variation doesn't feel good for you, this is a great option as well. Yeah. Another thing to think about when deciding what angle you're going to put your pigeon leg, your front leg, is how your knee feels about that, right? So that might be different from leg to leg. It for sure is for me. And perhaps you are in the sort of knee concerned category, but also not really open in your hips. So having this more open 90-degree angle with your pigeon leg in a traditional setup, again, is going to require more flexibility in your hip, but not in your knee, right? Because your knee is not bending as much. And typically that's where people tend to have issues with the knee, right? So for me, my knee doesn't have an issue. If I'm going to just do regular pigeon, I don't bring my leg as far forward, and then I can kind of settle in a little bit more. But you could decide, between all of those sorts of variations and positions and angles until both your hip and your knee feel comfortable, right? Lots of choices to think about. Try do your best to let go of what you think it has to look like. If you've done any of these videos with me before, you know that I used to be a little bit more hardcore about alignment and aesthetics when it came to the practice, and really that doesn't serve any of us very well in the long run. So go by how things are feeling, especially when you're talking about your knees and your hips, right? Because those are pretty important joints that we want to stay healthy as we get older. As I get into the other side for pigeon, I'll just kind of flip toward the back of my mat. I won't go through all of that with you again, but what I will do is kind of show you some ways that you can help yourself get into a more traditional pigeon position that you might encounter in a yoga class. So a lot of times we might be in, let's say, downward facing dog and wanting to come into pigeon. So if I want to bring my left leg into pigeon, again, I've got to abduct it, bring it out to the left, and kind of roll it open. So the thigh is rolling open. All right, now once I'm there, I'm not done yet, right? Because my back leg has a little bit more room, right? So I walk that leg back more, and that helps me feel the rotation outward. Again, I'm kind of checking in with how this knee feels and how this hip feels before deciding how we want to place things. Maybe with the help of a block, right? So that's one way you can think about getting into it from down dog. And right, as I came forward, right, you have to kind of lift your back a little bit and round upward in order to make room to pull that leg over. Sometimes we might be in, say, some standing poses, lunges, etc., where we have that foot down, right? And then we're going to transition into pigeon from there. So if you want to make life a little easier, you can take your back knee down and then just sort of scoot your leg into place. then scoot the back leg back. If you have the wherewithal and the energy and the space, you could, what I typically do personally, push down either into fingertips or flat hands or hands on blocks in order to lift the foot and then abduct the leg out and place it down. And then if there's room, walk the back leg back and settle in. Yeah. One of my favorite ways to kind of help people think about getting that shape and position is in down dog, to find a figure 4 leg, right? Which we'll talk about some variations on figure 4 later. So basically it's that pigeon leg crossed over the opposite leg, and then as we come forward and bring that leg up, it's pretty well in place, right? And then you can walk the back leg back a little bit more, right? Okay, and of course, that 90-90 position, again, might be a variation that you choose instead. So, let's talk about if you, for whatever reason, decided that that traditional pigeon position and the 90-90 you're not feeling, you want some other alternatives. So, you could do a figure 4, that crossed over leg, like I just did in down dog, from seated, right? It takes a little bit of room in order to manage this position, right? So if your hips are on the tighter side, that might not be in the cards for you. Now, if I sort of lean back a little bit, right? Think about that traditional pigeon position where we're folding over the leg and we're bringing the chest closer toward the pigeon leg. So if I'm leaning back a little bit, it's not requiring as much of my body. If I'm a little bit more upright, right, and my chest and my pigeon leg are closer together, you can feel the difference there. So you can adjust accordingly, right? And of course from here, a very, very popular option for pigeon is doing it lying down, right? And you can do that all sorts of different ways. You can just kind of keep your opposite leg down and ease into it. If you wanted to treat it a little bit more yin-like and wanted a little bit of help, you could prop up that opposite leg, right, instead of having to hold on like we see sometimes, right? You could also do that with your foot against the wall or piece of furniture, etc. If you are grabbing hold of your leg, try grabbing hold in some different ways, because you will find that it feels different depending on how you grab hold. And I mean, maybe if you're like super, super loosey-goosey flexible in your hips, maybe it doesn't make a huge difference, but it makes a huge difference for the vast majority of us mere mortals who don't have super open hips. So in the past, I used to always grab kind of behind that opposite leg and pull in. And if you have long arms, it might also feel okay to grab hold of the front of that leg. Now, notice, I'll do that again. I'll go from reaching behind the leg and then reaching for the front of the leg. It requires more reach, right? So then I have to kind of check in and make sure I'm not like scrunching my neck up, right? It definitely feels like things are pulled in more, right? The pigeon leg is closer, right? And maybe that feels good for you, maybe it doesn't, but you have that option. These days, I usually just kind of grab hold of the pigeon leg and pull in. When I do reclined pigeon, right, one of the differences that I'll sometimes make is to not worry so much about the outward external rolling of that leg, because it kind of affects the stretch that I'm feeling
in the glute area, right? So you could play around with letting the knee come closer towards your chest so your pigeon leg is less kind of rolled out, or kind of do it that way where you're sort of pushing out at the same time you're pulling in. So it really does affect which muscles you're getting at. So that would be definitely something to explore, right? And kind of see what your body feels like it needs. There is a sort of, in addition to that seated figure four cross, right? Another seated variation on pigeon goes by many different names. The one I'll use today is double pigeon, since we're in pigeon land, also known as fire logs. In yen, it's called square pose. So basically, that means having that sort of parallel pigeon leg and then attempting to stack the other leg on top, which, again, like some people's hips will just really do very easily. You can see that mine does not, and this doesn't feel good at all. The pressure of the foot kind of on top of that other leg doesn't feel good. This hip doesn't want to go down all the way. So my alternative is, instead of stacking my fire logs or my top pigeon leg, is to let it kind of stagger out in front. And then when you fold forward, it's actually a pretty nice stretch. And you will experience probably some differences from side to side. All right. Again, maybe you feel okay stacking, maybe not. If not, try staggering out in front, right? And this is not the same thing as cross-legged, right? It is a little bit more, a little bit of a tighter position inward, right? So the knees aren't out as wide and the shins are further forward. And of course, another sort of pose that you'll see in pigeon land is a standing figure four cross. So I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So typically we get into that from chair pose. So the knees are bent and the hips are back, right? And this is in figure four is a balance pose, right? So if you need some help with balance, grab hold of something. So as we go to cross that leg over, right, we are abducting and externally rotating, right? So the knee is out, the thigh is rolling out. But one thing to kind of check in with alignment-wise, again, like not because it's injurious or dangerous or whatever, but just because it helps you focus on what you're trying to achieve with the pose better, is to not let your hips drop over to that side, which is super, super common, right? We're not really opening the leg if we let the hip come with us, right? So we want to work open from the hip staying where it is, from the pelvis staying neutral. And you'll feel probably different about that from side to side. Again, trying not to let the hip drop and rolling open from that hip socket. And I often like to ask my students to kind of get into this shape and then see what happens when we don't cross over. I'll do that lying down sometimes too, right? Because using that opposite leg makes it a more passive stretch. And when we work on that sort of position more actively, that's more our mobility instead of our flexibility, when we're just using the involved muscles instead of using another body part for help. All right, so I think that I've said all I needed to say about all things pigeon. I probably missed a little bit, but you know, there's always time for a part two, right? So now let's go through a mini flow, a mini sequence to kind of tie those pigeon variations together. Okay, so I'm going to start lying
knees bent, feet on the mat. Just kind of take a moment to let yourself settle. Right. And then I'm gonna start with my right leg. I'm gonna extend that leg up toward the ceiling with a flexed foot. And I'm gonna work on some hip rotation here. And just to balance out that always externally rotating pigeon leg, I'm gonna also go in, right? So I'll let my toes and my leg kind of turn inward, internal rotation. And then I'll let things turn out, external rotation. And then I'll go ahead and cross that over into that reclined pigeon position from there, but we're not gonna stay just yet. We're gonna work back and forth. So I'll come back up and then rotate in, rotate out, cross over. Come back up, rotate in, rotate out, cross over, back up, rotate in, rotate out, cross over. I'm going to keep that leg crossed over from here, and you can kind of notice when I start to push against it, I can aid that moving out of the leg, right? And then I'm going to lift the opposite leg and lower down. Lift up, lower down, lift up, lower down. Lift up and hold. Keep your low back rooted. You don't have to worry so much all the time about flexing your foot in pigeon, except that I feel like it helps me to keep the muscles a little bit more active and working. So that's my 2 cents there. So I'm going to try to keep my pigeon leg position without using my hands as I detach the opposite leg and extend it forward and back in. And I'll just kind of look at that pigeon leg and notice what happens to that amount of rotation when I make it more active by detaching the opposite leg and not letting it help. All right, and then I'll stay in and grab hold of things and just sort of explore how that feels. You will notice a difference with how things feel here as well if you let your butt lift off the mat. Right? I don't really feel as much there, so I like to keep things down there as I pull the legs in. All right, let's release that and we'll try the other side. Take the left leg up, rotate in, rotate out, cross the leg over, reach back up, rotate in, rotate out, cross the leg over, reach back up, rotate in and out, cross the leg over. One more time, reach back up, rotate in, rotate out, cross over, and let the other leg help for the time being, pushing against it. All right, and then we'll lift the opposite leg, bringing that pigeon leg closer in and set it down. Lift it up, lower down, lift it up, lower down, and we'll lift up and hold. And again, I'm flexing my foot so I can try to kind of just feel a little bit more active through the leg, right? Personal preference. As I try to maintain as much of that shape as I can, extending the opposite leg forward and then bringing it back in. Forward and back in. Forward and back in. One more time. Forward, back in, and then grab hold of your thigh, your knee, your foot, your pigeon leg, whatever. Experiment and see how that feels for you. Okay, let's release from there, and you can just rock yourself up, and we're going to come on to hands and knees from here into table, and I'm going to see if we can
work some hip abduction and rotation from this position by lifting the left knee up and out to the left, that's abduction, and then thinking of knee lifting and foot coming in as we rotate. And it's not gonna go very far in that position, right? And back down, and we'll go from leg to leg. Up and out, and then think knee up, foot down, and then back down. Opposite side again. Okay, that's tough. I'm gonna take it to down dog from here.
We're gonna just take a moment to get out of your hips for a moment, right? And let some other things have some attention. All right. From down dog, I'm gonna walk my hands back toward my feet and then bend the knees and lift to chair from there. All right. Hands into prayer. Lifting the right leg and finding our figure 4 shape there. All right, letting the opposite leg help, thinking about trying to keep the hips square. Maybe try hovering the leg just above your opposite leg just to kind of see. All right, take it back on top. And then let's try folding over this figure 4 setup, and you could have blocks down here for help. This is a little bit tricky. I'm feeling more stretch here for sure. And then I'm gonna walk this forward and bring that figure 4 leg forward and set up my more traditional pigeon. Knee is over to the side, left leg walks back. All right, take a moment up top. All right, see if you can feel a little bit of space in your hips. All right, give those glutes a little bit of a squeeze, and let's tuck the back toes under. Maybe lift your hands, maybe not. See if you can hover the back knee for a moment, so it's a little bit more of an active pigeon. Take the knee down. Maybe take a little fold, maybe a prop for comfort. Let's take a moment. And then we'll take this more traditional pigeon into a 90-90 by letting the right hip come down, bringing that shin forward to 90 degrees, bringing the back knee forward. So both legs are about 90 degrees, right? We're not gonna measure. All right, let's try a little 90-90 twist, opening to the right from here. Okay, and then releasing the twist. I'm gonna keep that right leg forward in that 90-degree position. And I'm gonna face toward that leg and kind of square the hips. And I'm gonna grab hold of the left leg, and I'm trying to mimic that same 90-degree angle position, trying the operative word as I do this little bit of cradling. You may have heard this called baby cradle. And you can hang on wherever you feel like you need to hang on. And then you can stack your leg or stagger it out in front for double pigeon, aka fire locks. Take a little fold. Let's walk it up from there. I'm gonna unstack, unstagger, I don't know. Take this leg out of the way, this left leg. Send it back where it was in that 90-90 position. I'm gonna lift the knees and kind of let them go toward the back of the mat. And then from here, I'll plant the hands and just kind of step into down dog from there so we can hit the other side. We'll again kind of take a moment to let things get out of hip land and down dog. And then we'll walk the hands in toward the feet, bend the knees, come on up to chair. And then I'll bring hands into prayer and get my figure 4 going with the left leg crossed over. Again, kind of noticing how I'm using the opposite leg for help. Try not to move the hips or the pelvis. Maybe try a little hover.
See what happens, right? The knee is not out as much. Cross back over. Try folding carefully, carefully. Intense stretch. Okay, walk it forward carefully. Bring that leg forward and get settled into your kind of traditional pigeon position. Take a moment, knee is out, back leg is back, right? You can keep your hands down or lift them. Try lifting your back knee for an active pigeon. Lower down. Let's take a little bit of a fold. Okay, and then from there, we'll let the left hip come down, get our 90-degree angle with both legs, again, ish, right? Try a twist to the left. Okay, releasing the twist, keeping my left leg in that 90-degree shape. That'll be my bottom fire log, right? And then kind of squaring forward toward that leg, doing a little baby cradle with the right leg before getting into my double pigeon. Again, you can stack your leg or stagger it out in front, and then find a little fold just to the point where you feel an acceptable amount of stretch, a reasonable amount. Alright, we'll come up from there. I'll uncross that top leg, send it back, rotate up, and back toward the top of the mat, and then just stepping into downward dog from there. Taking a moment to kind of wiggle things out. And then taking it down to child's pose from there. Any version that you like. Okay, so there you have it with pigeon pose. Lots to think about and lots to explore, right? It's one of those poses that it's kind of, you either love it or you hate it. And I definitely have moments in both of those camps, just kind of depending on the situation. But I hope that now you at least have a little bit more information to use to help your body feel a little bit better about the pose. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to practicing with you again soon. Have a great day.